Feed My Sheep, Earthquake Reports, and more. I think this is something like take 4. A couple of my mistakes, and we had an interesting attempt earlier. It had no sound. It would have been great for practicing lip reading skills, but that's not what we're about here. We're having a look at tonight. We're having a look at the Cascade Range. This is data from a couple of days ago. The Cascade Range, nobody's been assessing it online much recently, so we're going to get that done. I had it all loaded up, but then we had all the activity at Yellowstone show up, so we focused on that. We're also going over to New Mexico and Texas for current activity, looking at Utah, and we've got some new discoveries at the end of the program. So we'll begin with a prayer because all our programs are dedicated to our Heavenly Father service. And thank you, Heavenly Father, that we can again come before you, that you have continued to protect this program, your program, not our program. And we give you all the glory for everything that is revealed. And we thank you for continuing to protect your audience and for continuing to bless us. We ask you, Jesus, to continue to shepherd us through your programs and lead us in discussion of all of the other things of end times that are going on, for we certainly have many challenges going forward. Many issues of censorship are increasing, and many issues of persecution are developing. And we thank you for keeping our awareness high in all of these things. Holy Spirit, we ask that you continue to bring your understanding, the understanding of truth, and may we have the spirit of peace. We ask for the spirit of peace as well for all of us. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're beginning in Maple Falls, Washington. We don't normally show Maple Falls because it's not normally available. This is our northernmost Washington site. It's north of Baker, right at the BC border, and we have VLF waves going through, commonly now, going through Maple Falls, Washington. This is a site from the 3rd going into the 4th, or the date is the 3rd going into the 4th. This is on the 1st, and we see more VLF wave activities. I've just grabbed a few snapshots so we can see that it's consistently having VLF waves through this site. This is the 17th of September. Lots of VLF waves through there that time as well. And these are the waves that we're talking about here. Across the top, across the bottom. Very low frequency waves. Now, these are not high amplitude off the chart waves, but they're still significant. Bellingham, Washington, we have a new site, and it's showing a lot of tremors most days, so nothing very large. This might be a 1.0, but this isn't right close either necessarily. And on the 30th, we're using a different channel because the other channels aren't reading as well. They're just still getting this site set up for amplitude and everything. In this case, we're using the HHE channel because it gives us a better representation of the VLF waves that are coming through. And you can see them here, going through here. You can see general baseline deviation through this portion, and that means there was ongoing low amplitude VLF waves. And here we trace this blue line going through here. That's a VLF wave going through here. And we see some more of them down here. Another in blue and black deviation here. So there's continued VLF waves through Bellingham as well. This is the best issue from for Bellingham activity on the, what is that? That's the 29th. And we see there's light VLF waves through this site on that day. And there's tremors throughout. And we've got some elevated baseline activity from 7 o'clock on. I'm not sure why that is, if that has to do with, well, I'm just not sure what it is, why we're having elevated baseline activity. It's not uncommon in the Pacific Northwest sites, but because this site hasn't been online for that long, I've only looked at a few days worth of data. I'm not going to state what is causing this. Lummi also had some BLF wave activity on the 23rd. Occasionally, Lummi has the fault associated with it have a shift. Okay, so Lummi Island has an associated fault and it shifts once in a while. Normally, it just has tremors, and this is what we see on the 29th. Well, sorry, that's the 2nd, on the 2nd. So light tremors, well, moderate-sized tremors, I guess. Not a ton of activity. This is Roche Harbor, also a new site, relatively new site. I think this started up on the 27th, and this site shows tremors as well. Moderate-sized tremors. Now this is Mount Shuksan, and we're going to show you what's going on with Mount Shuksan. This is the ski area in behind Mount Baker. This is about 5 miles east. And this is showing, on this channel, the other channels which we would normally use are not showing much in the way of activity. This is the HHN channel, which is less messed with. So it gives us a better description of the activity, but it shows it by vertical displacement of the baseline. And with this amount of vertical displacement of the baseline, there's a lot of activity going through Shuksan. Now this is what PNSN would have you believe is the current, or was the activity on the 28th at Mount Baker. All right? And this has been going on for months that we've had this type of a representation of the activity, which is why I don't show it. I don't show it except to show you a comparison of that to the truth. Now, from the 29th forward, they've been saying that this is the activity that we've had at Mount Baker. Now, I watched Mount Baker for 18 months before we got to December of 2020. And it developed into this activity. Now, this activity proves itself as being accurate because it has a magma churn signal, which all active volcanoes have. They all have a magma churn signal. And this site has always picked up a large magma churn signal. We also show, I believe this was something close to a 3.0 in Bellingham. And so that's another signal type that's identifiable on the seismogram. These are steam burst signals, a little curl up and long down from the line. We see those here at the bottom as well, and when they get very close together and a lot of steam is being released, this is the signal type that we get here. So these are very identifiable. There's 1, 2, tremor signals is 3, earthquake signals is 4, these short steam releases is 5, and then we've got 6 identifiable signal types on this seismogram, and that's what we expect to see. And that's not what we were seeing on the other seismograms. Those other ones are flat out lies. This is a high activity day at Mount Baker on a properly set seismogram. And this is part of the reason why they changed the representation at Mount Baker. They didn't want the public seeing this level of activity. And its volcanic activity has increased throughout the world in the last 9 months. So certainly Mount Baker activity, as it was increasing steadily up to this period, not perfectly steadily, but over, if you took a every 6 month snapshot, you would see every 6 months you've got an increase in activity, and so there would be an increase in this activity. Now, looking from Glacier Peak was settled, so I went 20 miles south of Glacier Peak roughly, and this is the Tall Timbers Ranch. And you can see that there's tremors in the page and there's elevated baseline activity. This would be related to magma infill. That's my expectation. Nelson Butte is northeast of Glacier Peak, and we can see that there's elevated baseline deviation activity at the bottom of the page. And so this is an active volcanic butte, and we've seen it on other seismogram types. They've changed the seismogram now. But we've seen it on other seismogram types that this has been a very active butte. Now we're going back to we're going to Puget Sound, and this is on the west side. This is Brennan, and this is the Dos Wallops. The Dos Wallops River goes through there. There's a Dos Wallops Road. There's a Dos Wallops Park. There's lots of Dos Wallops regarded in the area of Brennan. So this is Dos Wallops seismogram, and it shows some VLF waves, but this is in Brennan. And on the second, it showed even more VLF waves down at the bottom. There's lighter amplitude ones through here and through here. And there's light tremors throughout the page. Now, keep an eye on, or if you can, remember this seismogram as well as the Mount Rainier one, because this is going to become very pertinent pretty soon. This is the most active site on the west side of Puget Sound. Now this is VLF waves through McCleary, a new site. McCleary, we didn't have that site available a few months back. So I think this one just became available on the 27th. So we've got light VLF activity through there. The Moody Farm is also a new site. This is 7 miles east of Pacific Beach. And significant VLF waves through the Moody Farm. Enumclaw has occasional VLF waves through it. Okay, the odd tremor. Rainier Camp Muir had an active period, and this is typical for Rainier right now. With its elevated activity generally, this is a typical seismogram. We're not seeing any large earthquakes on it, no great cause for concern. Rainier Camp Muir, as seen from the USGS site, and we see magma infill on the page, and we see some uplift fracturing, and that's going to happen. It's a reactivated volcano, and that's what it's doing. That's what we expect. Rainier Emerald Ridge, this is the other site you need to keep in mind, the Brennan site and the Emerald Ridge site. This is going to do for a comparison with a Utah volcano that's reactivating. And this is Rainier Camp Muir. I just wanted to show you the change after 5 o'clock. Okay? Before the algorithm kicks in and knocks down the amplitude. So this is earlier, and this amplitude here at the bottom is lower in size. Okay, so this is smaller vibrations than this. So you can see the change. They've dropped the amplitude of the seismogram going down towards the bottom, and then before the algorithm kicks in, you can see that it's larger. So it's very likely that it was this large all the way through the page. We can't prove it, but we know that they were lying about the activity at the end of the day. This was the actual activity at the end of the day. So it was heightened from where they were, from what they were presenting. Now this is the gateway site from south of Rainier, and we can see from this site that there was not a drop-off in activity through the day. We can see that there was baseline deviation that was significant in this period, but it was still significant at the end. If we go up here, they would have us believe that the activity dropped off through the day and picked up a little tiny bit here, but in fact, the previous seismogram shows that it was this active. So this is the sort of thing you have to deal with working with PNSN seismographs. You have to sort out their lies, basically. And here we see the same lies being told from Mount St. Helens, where the activity has supposedly dropped off from this very significantly, even though we had some large tremors showing up, even small earthquakes. So we look at the end, we're 1600 to the 1700 line here, and we go to the 1700 line here, and right away the activity is much larger than what was represented on the previous seismograph. So that tells us that they're manipulating the amplitude. They've got an algorithm that applies to the seismographs, and that changes the size of the activity. So Mount St. Helens at the Spider, very active through the day. That actually continued through the day. They show it as turned way down or as very little activity at the bottom of the seismogram. And when we look at the next one, we see that it wasn't huge activity, but it was bigger than represented. Okay, so this is a doubling of the size of activity of the baseline right at the 1700 line. So again, this is correct amplitude through here. We do see fluctuations in activity, of course, but they're being messed with beyond what the volcano itself is doing. Lamberson Butte at Mount Hood, significant magma infill at the end of the day. That's back on the 3rd going into the 4th. And this is Palmer Lift. And Palmer Lift has moderate activity all the time, and that's what we're seeing here. There's no large quakes. It's just ongoing disturbance with magma infill. Palmer Lift, used from the USGS representation, is much the same. So it just confirms PNSN's representation of the activity. Sisters was fairly quiet on this day. I went to southern Newberry, found these uplift earthquake sequences. They look long, they look large. They're not. The energy is expended upwards and out of the crust, and that makes these much smaller earthquakes than what they appear. It's just that they're very close to this site. So being close to the site makes them appear larger. Crater Lake was busy for a period this day, on the 3rd, I believe, no, 4th. And lots of uplift fracturing going on, but nothing of large size. We're not worried about an eruption there right now. Medicine Lake volcano had larger activity, and we can see its notifications for the geologist to have a look at the page, or the seismologist to have a look at the page. Mount Shasta, typical activity with a few extra uplift earthquakes thrown in, and a little bit of, that's a steam release signal there. So a couple of steam release signals on the page, another one there. And uplift tremors or fracturing going on. This is a typical pulsed infill signature here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. The ones with the lines going through vertical means there's some crustal fracturing involved in the signal. So crustal fracturing with these. All right. Mount Lassen, typical activity. Now, Mount Lassen, we're going to do a little comparison with Cumbrae Vea. Mount Lassen erupted, I think it was 1912 to 1915. And before it blew with a pyroclastic explosion, and it did, it went big. How big, I'm not absolutely sure, but it left an ash deposit, a significant ash deposit. And it had 160 steam blasts recorded in the news media. Okay, so these were very audible blasts of steam from Mount Lassen. The same thing that Cumbrae Vea is doing. This is a normal type of activity for some volcanoes, and it causes a shock wave, not a gravitational wave, a shock wave to occur because it's taking a a bunch of water that's in the magma. It's coming up to a surface where it's depressurized and it's allowed to turn into steam, and it stretches in size 1,700 times to become steam. And so you're getting a blast of steam that's behind the shock wave. Okay, so these are steam blast explosions causing shock waves. And that's what's happening at Cumbre Vella. That's what was happening at Mount Lassen. Now, the top of Mount Lassen was allowing these steam blasts to go. And where did they go? They mainly went upwards, and that's what Cumbre Vella is doing as well. You can see them going laterally as well, but the force mainly goes upwards. And the reason, and that's a safety valve. Because the top of the mountain's open, it's not like Mount St. Helens where it gives you a massive big blast. Mount St. Helens had a sudden release of all of the weight off the top of the magma, and magma surged up inside the volcano. The water in that magma suddenly turned into steam, and a large volume all at once did, and that's why it blew. That's basics of volcanism. That can't happen at Cumbre Vella because it has an open vent to the sky. It's allowing the steam pressure to be released. And it's good to have those blasts because that's letting the pressure off. Now, this is the end of the activity that we had at Yellowstone, and I thought I would show that. This ended up being 11 and a half hours of activity, VLF off-the-chart activity at Yellowstone. And I traced the Yellowstone River. Now, it runs in a very deep rift called the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, and it goes all the way, that river goes all the way to Red Lodge, Montana. Red Lodge, Montana had off-the-chart VLF waves until the fires got going in the Red Lodge area. And I don't know if we lost that site to fire or what happened, but we don't have access to the Red Lodge site anymore. But the same time that Red Lodge, Montana was having off-the-chart VLF waves quite commonly, Bozeman was having them occasionally, and Dagmar, Montana was having the very large ones occasionally as series sets as well. And Dagmar, Montana has been shaking with VLF waves of lower amplitude, presumably from a fault in the Missouri River, and that's been going on since May. So, early May, as I recall. So there's been tons of shifting of faults outside of Yellowstone, Bozeman, Red Lodge, all the way to Dagmar, and then south in the Long Hollow area as well. And we've got volcanic reactivation of the Snow Mountain site in Wyoming, south of Yellowstone, about 80 miles or so. So there's a lot of activity around the edges of Yellowstone, and Yellowstone, that fault, I'm calling it the Yellowstone River Fault. I'm not sure what it's actually called. But it's very obviously a fault, and it's a very jagged fault. It zigzags its way through a mountain chain or a mountain area of North Yellowstone into Montana, and that covers about 100 miles of zigzags. And very, very difficult to move a zigzag fault. You can imagine trying to shift that is very difficult. They lock up. So when it does release, it's likely to cause a 5 or a 6 magnitude, maybe even a 7 earthquake. It's had a 7.2 or a 7.3 back in 1959. That was in the Hebgen Lake area, but we don't know how soon this fault would release. Everything could shift around it, and Yellowstone could remain fairly stable, and that fault may not move for 10 years. We don't know. So we're not predicting an earthquake coming up, but that fault would be a potential of causing an earthquake, okay, because we know it's a fault. It runs into a volcano, it runs through a rift-type valley, and it has a river in the bottom of it. That fits every description you need to find a fault. And the other thing is there's seismograms that are carrying sharp signals down the length of that fault. There's 3 of them. And the signals were not that large, but they were very small earthquakes or very large tremors, and those carried down the length of those three sections of fault, some 60 or 70 miles, as a very sharp signal. And if that were not a fault, those signals would be quite a bit muted. So the seismology proves that it's a fault as well. So we're going to get past Yellowstone. We're just going to glance at Waterville, Maine, because after the Yellowstone activity, we were having quite a bit of VLF activity in Maine as well. And this is after the earthquake that we had before the Yellowstone activity, of course. That was on the 4th. Now, you remember I said look at Mount Rainier. So I'm just going to take you back to Mount Rainier because it's not that far back. Where to go? We're at Mount St. Helens. Okay. Here's Mount Rainier. And you can see these are all steam burst signals through here. You see them lighter through here, heavier in this area. That's a magma churn signal there. Now we go to this Utah site. And this is Bald Mountain. It's called the Snow College site, but I went and checked it out. It's Bald Mountain, and it's 2.5 miles southeast of Ephraim, Washington. This has more steam blowing off of it than Mount Rainier. This has more steam blowing off of it than Mount Rainier. This is a threat to the public in reactivation. We're not saying it's going to blow, but the people in the area should be aware that they have a reawakening volcano 2.5 miles away from where they live. This is about 2.5 miles away. I measured the distance. So that's very significant. Trail Mountain Butte, this site is 17.5 miles east of Bald Mountain. And it shows some uplift tremors and it shows some magma infill. So the activity extends well beyond Bald Mountain. And this is further east of Bald Mountain and 6.5 miles west of Huntington. And I believe this is fault tremor activity. I'm not absolutely sure. It's got some indications that there's some steam release involved. But I'm not used to seeing this. I don't normally see this activity near Huntington, so we're going to have to keep an eye on it to make a determination down the road of exactly what's going on there. The best seismic determination we can find, at least. Camp Tracy, this is about a mile east of, where was it? Murray, North Murray. And that makes this only 2.5 miles from Salt Lake City as well. And this is magma infill through the top and through the bottom. That's a significant amount of magma infill. So we have reawakening volcanoes in a few areas in Utah. This is another one. This is a 1/2 mile northeast of Kebab. And so now we're down near the border, southern border, and a little bit to the west, and we have magma infill and lots of uplift tremors through here, enough that the computer is marking them for a seismologist review. So now we're jumping over, we're finished with Utah for now, and we're going over to take a quick look at the Mendocino Ridge inland, Myers Flat, Northern California. And this shows VLF waves, and it shows underlying vibrational signals, and then it shows high tremor level series events going on. This one here in red, this one here in blue, this one here in green. Very significant size involved in this. Now this is 1 hour per line on this seismogram type, so everything is compressed in width. So when you're seeing gaps in the line, some of these signals are VLF signals are 5-minute waves. They're so that low of a frequency, 5 minutes per wave. Dagger Draw. We're in New Mexico now, and this is on the 4th. and keep an eye on these two black signatures, and there's a big blue one down here. We're going to see better from another one. This one is a little bit over amplitude. The dagger draw site is a little over amplitude, so everything looks a little larger. Keep that in mind when we're looking at the 5th. And we see some very large activity here, but it's actually somewhat localized. We don't see these big blue signals elsewhere at other seismograms. We're going to look from Pecos, Texas, south of Dagger Draw on the 4th. And we see those black signals I was talking about and that blue one at the bottom. That's about a 3.0, that's about a 2.8, something along those lines. Here from Caprock, New Mexico, north of Dagger Draw, we see these two black signals still, and we see the blue signal. We see other signals as well, but these are the prominent ones, these three. And from Guadalupe, New Mexico, we see these two black signals and the blue one as well. So you can see how large these were. These were prominent through multiple signatures. Now this shares a lot of activity with Dagger Draw. So to place the activity that we're seeing here and at Dagger Draw in between the two makes a lot of sense. So that the activity is not actually at Dagger Draw, rather Dagger Draw is amplified and the activity is somewhat over towards the Guadalupe Mountains. So this activity that we're seeing, I place as primarily being between the two sites, Dagger Draw and the Guadalupe Mountain site. This is the Guadalupe Mountains today on the 5th. We'll compare that to Dagger Draw, which is on the 5th. Dagger Draw, like I said, is amplified. This bottom section of activity has to be closer to Dagger Draw because it's not looking anywhere close to this big at Guadalupe. So we're seeing a shift of activity from east to west as part of this. So San Simon Sink doesn't get the same tremor levels. It has more ongoing fault shifts. It's an area that shifts more easily, so you get lower volume or lower amplitude shift, but a lot more of it. And this is San Simon Sink today. And that's just a matter of what types of structure are moving past each other and what type of resistance to movement there is. If there's less resistance to movement, there's going to be less jolts. And with less jolts, there's going to be less tremors and less earthquakes. San Antonio is probably further away from where the fault activity is, so it all looks much smaller. But again, it's got smooth action faults basically happening in the area. This is that propagated signal to San Antonio that we saw at so many other sites, the blue signal and the two black signals. Monahans, Texas today had VLF waves going through it, and we see a couple of hours of that, and that's common for Monahans, Texas right now. Pretty much every day we're seeing a couple of hours of VLF waves. So fault shift through Monahans. Amarillo, Texas was also shifting today with fault shift waves, VLF waves, about 15 minutes worth. If we stretch this out, we're 20 minutes worth. To the very end of the signal. And this was the surprise for today. And we're going to get into investigating this because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, minus an hour, 9 hours of VLF activity at the Neilton Lookout site in Washington. And that is at the south end of the Olympic Peninsula. So we're going to look at that area next. And here's where I initially put the lookout. The lookout is actually over here. A little bit to the left, but it doesn't matter. We're only out by a quarter mile or something. But this, I had a good close look at, and this is an unnamed or unrecognized volcano. We're going to look at a few volcanic sites that absolutely prove that this area was active during and after the last period of glaciation. These are all Holocene volcanoes because this is a sharp, prominent volcanic feature called a tuya, which we described in a previous program. These grow up in water, commonly under ice, to do with glaciation. We're at 3,500 feet here, folks, and we've got a tuya here, that's a larger one, and one here. And we've got other ones associated with this mountain. This is Mount O'Neill. And that means that there was water held around this. Now, the only means of holding water around a mountain this big, at 3,500 feet, is the Cordelia ice sheet, which was from about 13,000 years ago, which was 2 miles in height. And so if this became volcanically active underneath the ice, or the ice dam existed along the shoreline or across the Pacific Ocean still, if that ice dam was holding and this area was melting, this would allow these prominences to form underwater. You cannot build steepness of lava like this without the feature occurring in water. These are made underwater, and then they have to be made during and after the last period of glaciation, while the water still remains. Another glaciation would just wipe these right out. They're very fragile compared to the movement of a glacier. So that identifies this mountain chain area as being active during the Holocene period in the last 12,000 years. 13,000 years. And this is absolute hard science. It's undeniable. Some professionals may deny it, but there's always deniers that probably had their schooling paid for by their rich fathers. Or mothers. Great expose on that recently, a couple of years back, of all the paid-for degrees that were coming out of universities, very regarded universities were accepting payoffs for degrees. Here we have Quinault Ridge, a little further to the north, and very significant under glaciation in water growth of this tuya form here, and we've got this ridge structure is pretty weak compared to glaciers going across it. You can see it's still got its rounded form of active volcanism. It's not eroded hardly, not significantly at least. And here we have yet another. This is a knife ridge. This is Fletcher Canyon down below here, so we're heading north of Neilton a little further. And this knife edge ridge would not stand up to glaciation either, and neither could it be formed without being formed underwater. This is a feature of lava. Okay, we've got so many lava features in the area. This mountain chain is built by volcanics, not by uplift, at least in this area. Lake Connie, this is a volcano, and you can see this is a caldera lake. This is an elevated ridge. This is a frozen lava wave through here. You can see the wave form of it. And this is a very jagged feature of lava coming out probably against an icy prominence and freezing in place. This is extremely jagged coming out the side, and a very, very unusual feature. So we've got a shelf of lava jutting out from the mountain, basically. And you don't get that unless it's water. Water in place and ice, very cold water. And here we have a lake caldera, and this edge has sloughed off. This would have been the caldera edge at one point. This would have been a circular feature. But as will happen with volcanoes, one side will give way. I mean, we're up on, it's very steep on any side of this. So it's very easy for an edge of a caldera to give way. And this is one of the Lake Connie volcano tuyas. This isn't called Lake Connie volcano. It's just got Lake Connie at the top of it. I don't think this one's got a name. I couldn't find one. If it does, it wasn't showing on Google Earth. But very clearly volcanic. And so we have absolute proof there being a volcano. Now we've got absolute proof of a fault being involved as well, because we've got this massive VLF signal. And it takes a big fault to produce a signal like this. So that fault is shifting. Where's the fault? We've got volcanoes that prove there is a fault, and we've got faults that volcanoes are always associated with a fault anyway. And so here we're looking at Dos Wallops River running through here up to the Quinault Lake, and this is the town of Brennan right here, and this is an uninterrupted rift valley, or valley at least, but it has the appearance of being a rift valley, a fault-related valley, in other words, that there's major fracturing that's gone along through here to create this uninterrupted valley from Neilton all the way to Dos. But it actually goes further than that. We'll step back a little further. And here is Pacific Beach. This is the other site that was very busy, was 7 miles inland of Pacific Beach. And that's right here. I didn't peg it, but it's right at where the arrow is here. So we've got a very active site right here, then this one, then following this valley with all the volcanoes in this area around to Brennan. And this whole area is a long, uninterrupted fault. And it's a major one for the area. And I'm not sure that anybody outside of a few geologists recognizes that this is an active fault that is currently moving. And it has Holocene volcanoes, quite a number of them, along the length of it. And since they're Holocene volcanoes, those are all classified as active, non-dormant volcanoes. They're not listed on anybody's map. So this is a discovery of an active chain of volcanoes following this fault. And this fault is very active, as proven by the blackout VLF chart. The heliplot. So I hope you've enjoyed this little voyage of discovery by Google Earth. And it's not a massive discovery. Faults are discovered all the time, folks. There's more that have not been discovered than they know about. I mean, you look at the Garlock Fault in California. That's a heavily studied area around LA for faults. And until the Ridgecrest earthquake happened, they didn't even know the Garlock Fault was there. And that's, like I say, it's a major fault. So unless they move, they're not discovered. So faults are discovered all the time when force dynamics change. When you change the direction that force is applied in, new faults show up. Or not new faults, but the faults that were already there are discovered. And so that's why fault discoveries are made commonly. They're not accepted very quickly in geology, because we've got a bunch of stuck-in-the-mud scientists, but that's the fact of life. It's geology seismology is a relatively new field. I mean, it's not been very good. It was only established in the Second World War, trying to hunt down subs and such. And so it's a very new field of science, and then people are actually against discoveries being made because they're in the field. Well, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a relatively new field, and discoveries are made all the time. So that's the way it is. I hope you've enjoyed this program. When you leave with God's blessings. Leave with peace in your heart, and joy, because we have a time of great salvation coming up for a great many people. The world is supposed to be shaken so that people will stop riding the fence between God and Satan. The choice has to be made for one or the other, and that's what it's coming down to. The evil is being exposed as being as dark and as terrible as it actually is, where it's absolutely horrible to kids and horrible to people. The promotion of suffering through evil is incredible, absolutely incredible. And if you think you're going to get away from this, any of us is going to be kept away from this so that we're not exposed to it. I mean, we don't have to suffer it, but we're going to be exposed to the knowledge of this. And it's really quite terrible knowledge of the truth of how bad evil really is. And how are people going to find salvation unless they see the truth? They see the choice between the love of God and the horrid evil of Satan. So I hope that everyone, I hope that all receive eternal life, that all find salvation. It won't happen. God says it won't happen, but that's the hope that all Christians have, is that everybody turns to Christ. And so we're going to close this program, and I hope you like what we're doing. If you do, give us a thumbs up on your way out, recommend us to your friends, and we'll see you next time on Feed My Sheep, Earthquake Reports, and more. Bye for now.